Hello, my name's Colleen and I'm here with The Room to Write with The Journey of a Story series, and we're talking with romance author Laurel Ostiguy today, and she's going to tell us a little bit about how she writes and what she's writing these days.
Yeah.
Hello, Laurel.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks.
So we'll start out with the usual question of just sort of trying to get a picture of how you write, what's it look like, what's the process, and that sort of thing.
Sure. I try and write whenever I get a moment. So what I mean by that is I typically will write early in the morning with a cup of coffee, which is nice. Like I picture myself on the couch kind of curled up. I do work full time, so it's usually in the morning or the evening hours that I find those times where I have a little bit of time to myself where I can kind of process it and write. I do take a lot of notes. I send myself a lot of notes. I talk into my cell phone a lot, and so when I'm driving or, I have a moment to myself, I kind of will add some things and send it to myself to kind of remind myself later to write about that or to add that to a story. So I try and find and steal any moment that I can to write.
And you're a mom, so you have to do that.
Yep.
We've had a few moms on here, and they've given us some tips on how to sneak it in. So you're on your third book now.
Yes.
And so what is the breakdown as far as, what's the timeline? If you're just finding time in the mornings and the evenings, how are you able to get all of that written?
Yeah, I think it's the quantity of the time. So, if I can get a couple of chapters in that time, I think that sort of sets the pace. Outlines are a big thing. I learned that the hard way. My first book, I did not do an outline, and so I found myself having to go back and read a lot and then pick up where I left off, where with an outline, I can kind of already look at the sheet of paper and say, okay, now I'm on chapter 6. Here's where I need to go from there. So I'm not rereading so much as I was before. So that has helped me pick up the pace a little bit and be able to write quicker in a shorter period of time.
Okay, so you're cranking it out.
Yeah.
And
Trying to, yeah.
So you said you didn't do, I've heard the terms planners and pantsers, so it sounds like you're a planner. What is that, I guess, how did you always write? Did you always write as a planner? Did you always write as a novelist? Or why are you a writer right now, I guess?
Yeah, I used to write a lot in journals. So I was that person that always wrote my thoughts down, memories, things that I wanted to keep. I was constantly writing. I have tons and tons of journals tucked away that I always wrote. I was the person that when I traveled, I wrote down what I did. And then I think for me, it got to a point where I had so many stories in my head of moments and things, and I just thought, I should just really try and write a book, which is a big undertaking, and it was scary. So I actually tried to write one many, many years ago, back when there was floppy disks, if you can believe that. So yeah, so it's somewhere that it doesn't exist anymore because I can't get it off of it. But yeah, I used to commute a lot back and forth to Boston, and I had this story in my head that I would just constantly daydream as I was driving, and it was one of those where I thought, I just really have to start writing this down and see where it goes. So that was the first book, and that's why I didn't have an outline, because I think I was constantly thinking about it. Mm-hmm. So every time I thought about it, I'd get home and write what I just thought about in the car, and it sort of progressed from there.
And so how does one find to be a novelist that writes romance? Did you always see yourself going that direction, or how did that happen? Yeah,
that's a great question. I think the genre sort of picked me, if that makes any sense, because of the stories. So I like to say, while I'm a romance writer, when I'm trying to pitch my books, which I'm not very good at, which I can get to later, but I try and tell people it's a little bit different than a typical romance. So I guess the genre sort of picked me because it didn't know where else to go, but there's a huge romantic element to it. But I'm actually in the new adult category, so I'm not young adult because of the content, and I'm not in the bodice ripper sort of category of romance. So when I do describe it, I say I'm a new adult romance writer, and that, the more you talk about it, people start to go, oh, okay, I kind of get that genre and that sort of area that I'm in. So it's specific, but
What is that? I mean,
yeah,
what is
so new adult is really the content, I guess, is how I describe it to people is because it's the 18 to sort of 25. It's the subject matter that would be considered too old for new adult, but it's not that 30s and 40s, children, marriage, that kind of romance.
Okay.
So I think the 18 to 25, even maybe younger than younger than 30 would be fine, but it's just the content that really puts you in the new adult category. So I wouldn't want to market myself as young adult because that wouldn't really be.
Right. And it wouldn't be just plain fiction because it's too romantic.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. Yep.
There's so many genres out
I
there.
know, that's what I mean. It's like I had to learn that when I finally put my book out and people all over were saying, nope, you're new adult.
Yeah,
So-
and that's something we haven't talked about. I don't know if you want to go into it at all any more than that, but picking your genre, maybe you didn't even know exactly what you were writing when you were writing it. You're writing your story,
Yep.
and then you get to the point where you're publishing, and they need to know where they're going to sell
Correct.
this.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So somebody that was, Goodreads is a really good resource, and I sort of pitched my book on that to ask. I was looking for beta readers, and someone said to me, "Oh, you're not a young adult," and then almost immediately people started adding, "Yep, no, you're definitely new adult." And then I started researching new adult, and I thought, "Oh my God, yes, I am. I'm in that category," and that's really how I found out about it. So the book was already written, and they basically, a lot of people said, "No, you're in this category," so that's how I found out about it.
Interesting. So
Yep.
you thought you were writing young adult the whole time?
Pretty much, yeah, because I assumed the 17 to 18-year-old when they're starting college. Yeah, I just assumed that, and
Yeah.
people were like, no, it would be considered new adult, so I just went with it.
All right. And so, speaking of beta readers,
Yep.
that is something that is interesting and that people talk about that you almost feel like you're supposed to know exactly what that is. And
Yep.
I don't know if you want to go into more detail about where do you find a beta reader, what is a beta reader,
Yep.
and are they worthwhile? Can you skip them? What's the value there, etc.
Yeah, they are so valuable. Beta reader is basically someone that you hire, and whether you pay for them or you don't, that's completely your choice. I prefer to pay for the service because I feel like it's very separate from having a friend read it. But really, a beta reader is someone that, in my instance, I pay them to read my novel and basically rip it apart. And by ripping it apart, it's really very appropriate critique of the book. They're usually people that are very passionate about romance, new adult. They'll actually advertise themselves and say, I really love paranormal romance, I really love sci-fi. So you want to pick someone that really loves your genre, and so that usually means they've read a lot of them. And so
Right.
by reading a lot of them, they'll know, hey, this book is not going to sell, and here's why. Or here's what I thought was really good, but what needs to be fixed. Typically, their job is not to tell you what's good about your book, which I really like because, I appreciate the compliments and everything. And when you do get one from a beta reader, it's like really,
Oh, yeah.
oh yeah, it's really legit, and they just had to tell you something was really good. But their job is really to tell you all the things that are wrong. And so typically you should hire. And again, there are free services. So if you go on a lot of websites, you can actually put in beta reader. You can find people that just love it for the idea of getting in front of a new novel. Avid readers that are just looking for something to do, retired people, ex-librarians, ex-editors, people that are just still want to continue into the business and help people. And then there are people where this is their real job, that you hire them. I find the price very reasonable. I don't find it to be really expensive. I think it's
What
very...
would a typical price be?
Yeah, I mean, I've paid anywhere from $50 to $200
Per reader?
per reader. It depends on the length of the book. It depends on what you're asking them to do. Some of them will tell you, here's what I'll do for you. Others will say, what are you looking for? And you can give them questions and say, can you, answer these 10 questions for me and tell me what you think. Typically, they'll do it chapter by chapter. They'll actually do track changes in your novel, which I love. I always say to them, please mess this up as much as possible, because at this point you have so many versions of it somewhere in your computer, it's not going away.
Right. Are you ever nervous about, so like, I'm a person, I'm looking for a beta reader. Where do I look? Are there websites that you would recommend? Maybe websites you would recommend to stay away from? And then also, like, what are the risks with having somebody read your work to the point where they can actually edit it or track changes with the editor?
Yep. I think Goodreads is really great for the author enthusiast community, and anyone that really loves to read is on Goodreads. I'm not on there as much as I probably should be. I'm busy writing, so I know people go on there a lot and say, I'm reading this book today, which I love. I get alerts a lot saying, like, my friends are reading this, which I love to see. Nice. But what I like about Goodreads is that they're very specific about what you put on there, and so there are sections that you cannot advertise if you're a pay service. So they don't want people getting, say you're looking for someone and you don't have the money to pay or you don't want to. Goodreads really backs that person up and says, you can't put paid services on here. Then they'll have a section that says, if you're looking for someone that wants to advertise paid service, you can go over here. And so they will actually let you sort of go in between the two. There's a moderator on there. I see her picture constantly, and I think she does a fabulous job of saying, you should really be over in this section. This
to the writer?
I believe so. I'm not sure her job, but I always see her little picture icon. Okay. So I just know by
like
what she looks like.
Yeah, floating around.
And she does a great job of basically saying, almost get off here. You should be over here. And then you can communicate with people so they can see you writing back and forth. So you almost feel that there's that secureness of the person's legit. They're on there. They have to have a profile. They have to say who they are. Could someone take your money and run? Absolutely. You always risk that chance in 2018 with how many websites and everything there is. So,
right. Is Goodreads a free service, or is that something?
Yeah, it is. Okay. Yep. Anyone can go on.
Any that like steer clear of this one, or like things to look for that if somebody's looking for a beta reader, what are some guidelines that maybe they should keep in mind? Or
I always talk to people about beta readers. When I read an aspiring author, someone that's my friend that's an author, anybody that wants to ask me, I always say reach out to someone that's done it, because right now I have a pocket full of recommendations that I can give to someone and say these were excellent beta readers. And it's all by reference. So somebody, this new girl that I used this time, her reviews were phenomenal. Like, people were just like, I almost feel bad putting how great she is because some other people are going to use her.
And that was Goodreads?
Yeah, and that was through Goodreads. So that's one thing. But I always tell people to reach out to me, ask me. I'm happy to share my beta readers, because that's the beauty of this business, is once someone does a really good job, you want them to get business somewhere else, because it keeps them in it, and it shows your gratitude for what they did for you. So I say reach out to authors. And reach out to someone that you know that is either an author or an aspiring author, and get the name of someone and just email and just say, hey, do you have any good beta readers? And
how many would you say you should have? Is one enough, or?
No, I would say at a minimum 4.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just 4 different people's opinions, and you can't go wrong with that. So my last book, I had 6. I was very pleased with that. It does get towards the end where the last person doesn't have as many recommendations. It's always the first person. Like, right. I always set the stage by sending it to the first person saying, you are my first beta reader. And it's almost like I want them to just take a deep breath and go, wow, this is going to be a lot. It's a lot to look through. Right. And then hopefully by the 6th person, their recommendations are, hey, you should kind of change this scene a little bit, or this character could use a little bit of this. But it's usually not so much meat of the story, because you have changed so much. So you'd have first beta reader reading it, and you would make your edits after that? Yep.
You wouldn't have a few at the same time?
No,
Okay.
I personally want to use one document, because that's the only way I know how to keep it all fluid,
right.
to where by the time I send it to my editor, it's one document that has been worked and reworked and talked about, and all that kind of stuff. So I don't want too many out there that I get confused or.
Right. Okay. And so a beta reader is different from an editor,
Yes.
even though
Yep.
it sounds like they sort of serve what pre-editing services basically, because
Yep.
they're kind of giving you feedback.
Yep.
So do you pay for an editor, or is that something that comes with, however you publish it, or what's that look like?
I self-publish, so which basically means I put it up through CreateSpace, which is a wonderful resource. And I'm on a bunch of different, so I'm on Barnes & Nobles, I'm on Kobo, I'm on iPhones, iTunes, any Amazon, basically anywhere books are sold. But an editor basically gets you to that point where they'll actually internally design it for you, which is very difficult to do as well. But yes, I highly recommend spending most of your budget on an editor. It really makes or breaks the story, and their job is really to, line by line, punctuation, vocabulary, content, flow, character plot, holes in your story. So usually if a good editor will have your book for a couple months the first time around, and then you work with revisions. But I would never skimp on an editor. They are worth the money. It's a make or break, I think, truly. I would never ask a friend to read. I just think that that's something that somebody studies to do. Many people go to school for it, or they have worked under someone for 10 years and now they're freelancing. So I highly recommend paying most of your budget for a very good editor. And again, recommendations are big.
And I'm guessing an editor is going to be more than a beta reader.
Oh yes, yeah.
Okay.
A good editor should cost. And they, like for instance, my editor, she actually does internal design, so she actually sets your book up directly to print. So she asks what size you want. She does all the graphics inside. She does your, your acknowledgments page, your ISBN page. She does everything, the copyright page. So she does everything nuts to bolts on the inside.
And do you find her through CreateSpace, or how do you find an editor?
No, I actually found her through another author. Okay. She was recommended to me. I can see why they recommended her. She's absolutely wonderful. And she actually lives in Indiana, so I don't know if I'll ever meet her. I hope someday too, because she has done wonders for me, and I can't say enough wonderful things about her. But she lives in Indiana, and she's a freelance editor. This is her job. She has her own company. And she's fabulous. So she came through a recommendation, and I could not be happier with her. So
nice.
I plan on sticking with her as long as she'll keep me. So yeah.
Have to take a trip to Indiana.
Yep.
So when you're doing your editing and your beta reading, have you, I like to kind of ask about how does your story change? Does it change? And maybe you want to talk a little bit about where you have the 3 different books. The first one you didn't so much outline, but how did things change in terms of when you started writing? Did you know where it was going to end? Did it end where you thought it would, or did you give it to beta readers or editors? Does that change the game? Sort of maybe talk about the process of the actual story itself and how that kind of forms, and maybe what you've learned over the last 3 books.
Yeah. I would say for the second book, it definitely changes a lot during it, and you really you have to be really humble in yourself, and you have to sort of take a moment and step back and think that these people are really just trying to help you, and you can't take things personally. I've had people say you should take that entire chapter and throw it out, and I did. I didn't even think twice about it. I thought, if someone really feels that passionately and is trying to help me, they said you do not need it. It has no value to the story. And I took the entire thing out and just stuck it in a folder somewhere and never to be thought of or seen again. So yes, it does change a lot. They will give you recommendations. I've had people tell me they've hated a character. I've had people tell me they absolutely love a character. I've learned also to ask better questions of the beta readers. What do you think of my main character? Is she relatable? Do you actually like her? Do you find her sympathetic? Do you find her kind? Can you even envision what she looks like? That's a big thing too. I've had people say, I have no idea what that person looks like, and I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot to put really like a good description of what they look like. I know what they look like
Right.
because they're in my head, but so I've had people tell me those things where you kind of step back and go, wow, I'm so glad I had someone read this and tell me those things, because otherwise you just go along in your own mind. And you want to be respectful of your editor too. They're, when you hire a professional, they're professional, and they really want you to give them a product that's worthy of their time and their energy. And I've learned that a lot from my first book to my third. Just being better prepared when I send it through is a big deal. I almost, looking back on the first one, it took a lot longer to edit it, and she was teachable. She taught me, I should say. So she would say, here's what I'm going to tell you about it. And she gave me a lot of notes that I still keep, and I won't send them to her, the second book, until I read over all her notes from the first book and apply it to the second book. So a really good editor will also do that. So,
right.
And that's not something that they're saying, here's what you're paying for, is all these notes. They just do it because they want their product, which is they're putting their name in your book, to be good too. So.
And so through the 3 books, did you like one better than the other, or we know that you didn't just sit down and crank out this book, and then there were, sort of what does it look from the messy point of view in terms of did one book take longer than the other, and which was your favorite book to write, maybe which was your favorite book to read if there's 2 different ones, and maybe a little bit more about the 3 different that can kind of bring them to life for us.
Yeah, the first book was long. It's 474 pages. I really enjoyed writing it, but it took me a really long time. It took me about 4 years to do it. But again, working full time, having kids, managing life, it was really that it wasn't something I saw an end to. I was just doing it. And then, so I have a special, it'll always be special to me because it's my first book, and I can actually say I did it, and I'm very proud of it. I really like the story. I think it's very different. I've been told it's very different than a typical romance novel, so I'm really proud that I sort of thought outside of the box and said, I want to make a story that is going to leave people touched. It's going to leave them thinking about things in life. It's got a really good element of, I based all my books in the 90s because I didn't want there to be cell phones. I didn't want there to be emails, which you can relate to.
That's a tricky part.
Yeah. I didn't want there to be emails. I didn't want it to be where you can get in touch with someone so quickly that it takes that heartbeat element out of it. I wanted them to run into each other on campus, and you catch his eye, like that kind of thing, and you have to find out who someone is. And so I really set the stage in the first book with that, and I think I've always really enjoyed that. I find it fun to write. Writing about a fictitious campus has been so much fun. I've made up the entire campus. I can map it out in my head. I know where the buildings are. That's been a lot of fun. The difference with my second book, I wrote it in the first person, so I wanted to change it up a little bit. I wanted to tell one of the character stories, but it really ties in the first book as well. So I really did enjoy writing that book because I hadn't written a book in the first person, so that was really enjoyable to me. And I can pick that up whenever I want and know exactly where it is because it's all about her. So that book is really enjoyable to me because I can literally flip open a page, and just sometimes when I just feel like doing it, I'll just start reading, and I can kind of get into her and know where she is. And with the third book, I went back to the original framework, so it's past tense, it's all about the characters, and so I'm kind of 1 and 3 are sort of written in the same context. So it was fun to do the third because I went back to how I did for the first, so I'm kind of switching it up a little bit.
And that's interesting that you went third person, first person.
Yep.
Did you find sometimes it was hard to do first person because I don't know, for me, I first wrote a draft in first, and then I switched to third because I felt like I was able to use my imagination almost more in third. Yep. Did that have any effect on how you wrote that?
Yeah, it is hard. I envy people that write in the first person because I almost find you're really telling someone's story and how wonderful that is. And you can't really get lost in it. When you do a third person, you can bounce back and forth between characters, which is awesome. But you really have to stay focused, because you can kind of go, start talking about somebody else. And I've had beta readers go, I'm not interested in that person. You know, they're just a minor character. You need to go back to the main focus of the book. So I think with first person, you can get right into it. It's all about them. But
Right.
third person, you know, you can kind of get lost in a lot of different characters, which writing books in college, you have a lot of characters. So
Right.
you just have to be careful of that. But
All right. Well, I feel like I have 1,000 more things I could ask you. But sort of to wrap things up, any sort of things that you learned the hard way, or things that if there was a young writer or a writer trying to get back to their writing or into their passion, what would you say to them, or what are some pieces of advice maybe that you'd give to them?
yeah, I would say listen really well the first time around and take people's advice. Really, if you should manage a budget. I didn't do that the first time around. Unfortunately, it is a business, so you know, the creative part of us all wants to go, this is awesome, I'm going to write a book, but then you really have to sit and think, okay, this is a business, it's going to cost me. It will cost you to make money. So, and not that it's about making money, but in order to actually do it right and to put out a product that you're happy about and that you're pleased, it's going to cost you money. And so put out a budget, spend all your money on an editor, spend the rest of your money on a really good book designer. There's tons out there. I have tons of resources. I've met some really great people in the business. I talk about it a lot. I was just on a panel about book design at the New England Authors Expo. People do judge your book by a cover. It's just the way we are. We want something beautiful. We want something that catches our attention. We want something that tells us what genre we're looking at or what the book is about. So that's really important. And my advice is that anyone can do it. So if you really want to do it, you should really just hunker down and do it, and you'll be proud that you spent the time to do it. And it's something to be really proud of. So I would encourage anyone to at least try it and see what happens. So.
All right. Awesome. Thank you, Laurel.
You're welcome.
And if you'd like to check out any of those resources, I'm going to see if I can get some onto my website for you. And the website is www.theroomtowrite.org. And if you want to be on the show and you're a writer and you're published in any form, please give me an email at Colleen@theroomtowrite.org. And thanks again.
Thank you, Colleen.